Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast with me, Pete Tigers. My guest today is a supremely talented caster. He passed his master casting exams at the age of 20, done a lot of fishing before that as well. He spent a year guiding with Astounding Devon, and we had a fantastic time along with Duncan as well. We'd hang out, we'd fish, we'd cast, we'd try out rods. It was just one of those fantastic years. John Boon also talks with me candidly and openly about mental health and how it has affected him and how he has addressed it and how fishing has helped him through some very, very difficult times. I'm sure if you're listening, you may be going through similar sort of moments like this too. And I'm really hoping that this podcast will help you a little bit as well, but also you're going to be entertained by listening to his story. He really is a great guy, thoughtful, a wise head on young shoulders. So I'm going to pass on to John now, and I hope you enjoy this one very, very much. Hey, John, great to catch up with you as always. How you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm all good. Thanks, mate. How are you?
Very well indeed, thank you. I'm heading off to Italy very, very soon, so I'm getting super excited about that, so can't wait for that. But tell me, I know I saw you a month or two ago, but how's your fishing year been so far?
Quiet in terms of being able to get out. I've not got out as much as I'd like to, just with life things going on, really. Seems to be the way at the minute, but yeah, when I have got out, I've enjoyed it. Had a few fish. Haven't done anything other than trout and grayling fishing this year, with one thing or another. I mean, the rivers are so low at the minute. We've had a little bit of rain today, but it's going to take an awful lot. And I'm hoping we get a decent amount before the end of the season so I can get a couple of days out, swing some flies with some salmon and see what happens. But yeah, not as much as I'd like to get out, but no, it's been enjoyable when I've managed it.
Good. That's good to hear. And for listeners, can you tell us where your home water is, where you're likely to hit most of all if you get some time to go out?
Be the Welsh Dee will be number one. I fish on the Llangollen sections and on the Corwin sections, but I've also previously been members of clubs that have had tributaries off the Dee, so like the Allen and the Alwyn, the Cairo. So yeah, the Dee system would be home, and I've been fishing that for must be 15, 16 years now. Didn't start on rivers, but that'll be, I'd say that the kind of the river fishing is where it's at for me now.
And you said that you didn't start on rivers. Does that mean that you went the more traditional route, started on a still water, built from there and moved on to rivers?
Yeah, started on still waters, actually, in terms of fishing wise, I started fishing when I was about 13, 14. My parents had a caravan in Anglesey, so it started there with a bright green Fladen rod with a Shakespeare reel and about 4 pound monofilament on it. I was float fishing for wrasse and things like that, so that's where it started. Got into the fly fishing. I knew my godfather is a big fly fisherman, primarily salmon. Doesn't get out as much anymore. He's getting a bit older, but I used to go up on the Spey with him, and he used to go up to Scotland a number of times in the year. So I'd seen videos of fly fishing, and then I had a lesson with Gary Coxon at Durnford Lake when it was a trout fishery. And it started from there, really, yeah. Fished Mickle Trafford, some meadow fishery in Mickle Trafford. I fished that for a number of years, along with Chirk fishery. So they were the two kind of the closest ones to me. So that's where I cut my teeth, really.
Where do you see the Stillwater scene at the moment from the point of view of fisheries that you used to visit? Because Durnford I've been up to and know a little bit. That's no longer a public fishery. But how does that scene look to you? And are they still the nurturing place for people to learn to fly fish?
That's a good question. I'd say, unfortunately, like I said, Meadow is gone now. That was a 3-lake complex with quite a big tackle shop as well. So that was quite a big operation. And it was always, when I first started going, if you went on a Saturday, you were queuing to get on. And then, sadly, as time went by, it kind of, one reason or for another, the fishing went off a little bit, but the owners decided to sell up, and that was it. So really, for me, there's a couple of fisheries, Llandegla and Chirk, they're both very, very small ponds, really. Are they the kind of? I'm not sure, really. I don't get out on the still waters as much anymore. It tends to be if the river's in flood and I'm planning on going fishing, I'll end up going to a still water. Or for something a little bit different in the winter. I very seldom will go to a still water in the summer. Elladine is probably the one I go to most these days in Shropshire. That's a good fishery. That's got several lakes, a tackle shop, and a cafe, and that's always busy, and that's doing very well, I believe. But whether they're as popular as they were 20 years ago, I couldn't really say, really.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, and I hope those that are out there are still forging ahead, still have a loyal following, and keep doing what they're doing, because it's important we have these places, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously, as an instructor, they're perfect places to get people on and get them their first fish. So, yeah, they're really important. It's how I started, and I know it's how a number of people listening will have started before possibly migrating to the rivers. I don't know why. That seems to be a bit of a natural progression for a lot of people, and that's no disrespect to Stillwater, because it's fantastic fishing, and the UK is really well known for it. So it's really important, in my opinion, these fisheries continue to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you talked about the Spey, and you've talked about not going to still waters as often as you used to, perhaps. So where did the rivers come in? Was it that trip to the Spey that got you interested in rivers, or was there another route as well?
No, it was another route. So the Spey was a bit of a later thing for me. So I probably started fishing rivers about a year after getting into fishing. I joined Rossett and Gresford Fly Fishers, which are based near Wrexham as the name suggests, in Rossett and Gresford. And that's on the River Allen, and that's a small little tributary of the Dee. And that's a wild fishery with a good amount of grayling in it and some good-sized trout as well. It's a funny sort of river in terms of fly life, as it's got a huge population of gammarus. So if you ever do a kick sample in there, the amount of gammarus to any other kind of nymph is just unbelievable. So the fish are primarily feeding on the scuds there. So it's a lot of nymph fishing. You will catch them on the dry, but I would say you don't get kind of sustained hatches on that river. But there's plenty of fish in it. It's a healthy river. And that's where it kind of started for me in terms of river fishing. And then after that, it was a few days here and there with different guides to kind of improve my skills on the bigger rivers. So the kind of small rivers seemed fairly straightforward, even though they're not. But in terms of size, compared to something like the Dee, it's a bit like, where do you start, as you don't know the river craft to start with. So it's kind of a bit easier in a way to read a smaller river. It's a bit more obvious. It doesn't make it any easier to fish. But in terms of going on to bigger rivers, I had lessons with kind of guides and took it from there, really.
And did you find that having guiding fast tracked you as much as you hoped, or much more quickly than you'd have hoped?
Definitely did. So when I was probably about 16 at this point, and I was obsessed with fishing. So as soon as I was in from school, I was watching videos on YouTube. I remember the old Orvis videos where they'd done classes in America and they'd filmed them, and the quality was terrible. But I watched them religiously. DVDs, the Complete Angler series with what's his name? Jeffrey. He'll come to me. And Ray Boras, and things like that. So I used to watch and read fishing stuff all the time, and I'd try it out. And yeah, sometimes it worked, but nothing quite did it like going with a guide who would show you exactly how to set a leader up and exactly kind of where to fish and how to fish it, and the kind of nuances that it comes with. So it definitely fast tracked me in terms of my ability of fishing, going with a guide.
Jeffrey Palmer. It's just come to
Jeffrey
me.
Palmer. That's it.
That's it. So having those lessons, and as an angler now, does that mean that you still apply, and you're obviously an extremely experienced angler and a guide as well, but did that influence how you fish now to the degree that you'll mix things up? Or is there, when you get some time to go to the river now, do you just go with the flow? Do you prefer a dry? Do you prefer a duo? Do you prefer streamers? Do you prefer nymphing? What do you prefer to do when you've got some time to go fishing?
Nowadays, it sounds a bit cliche, but it's not about the fish for me. It's about getting out and being on the water and just having a bit of peace from everyday life. I would say back in the day, I would fish very hard and I would ring the changes quite a lot. These days, I tend to go with an idea of what I'd like to do, and if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. And I wouldn't say I religiously switch methods whilst I'm on the water in order to catch fish. I might reel in, sit on the bank for a bit, move upstream, fish a different pool. But for me now, because time is more limiting, I like to kind of fish the way that I want to fish. So for me, dry fly fishing would be the ultimate. Very visual person, and there's nothing quite like watching a fish rising and then taking it on a dry fly. So, if you said to me you can only fish one way for the rest of your life, it'd be dry fly fishing for me. I'm not a huge fan of nymph fishing. Well, I say I'm not a huge fan of nymph fishing. I'm not a huge fan of your tight line nymphing in the summer. It's an extremely efficient method of catching fish, but it's just not something I particularly enjoy. It's interesting. I was listening to Trout Boon by John Gierak the other day, and he talks about nymph fishing and then throwing flies upstream, and he says it's just not something. It's something that you can do for a little bit, but it's not quite fly fishing. It's not quite fly casting. So for me, the fly casting element of fly fishing was always a large part of it. That's a large part of the enjoyment for me. So that's why I don't, I tend not to Euro nymph in the summer. I'm quite happy doing it in the winter, grayling fishing and things like that. When it's freezing cold and I haven't got to think about managing line and stuff like that too much. Quite happy doing that, but no, in the summer it'll be dry fly predominantly, and nowadays looking for rising fish rather than searching the water with a dry fly. I'd rather spot a fish and watch it, and then try and take it. And then if nothing's happening, I'll walk up the river rather than just kind of methodically searching the water with a dry fly.
A couple of things came to my mind from what you were saying there. One was that it is more about the fish. And I wondered if you had sensed or felt there has been the change in the fishing community about that. Of course, people can take whatever they want from their days fishing, but wondered if you'd sensed a little bit about that. And then tying on to that, you talked about the casting aspects of it. And I think that's probably why I like it and think that there's perhaps a little bit more to it, because I like making a nice cast, and sometimes I get rewarded for that. And that is part of that more than the fish. Of course, that can help lead to the fish. But do you sense there has been a little bit of a change?
Possibly. I think, the end of the day, we go fishing to relax and enjoy ourselves. So however you want to fish, as long as it is within the rules of the water you're fishing, that's absolutely fine. I couldn't care less, really. For me, it's about being out and being in nature and taking things a bit slower than things are in normal life. So that's why I quite like to sit and watch and watch the fish rise and try and target a specific fish. That's just the enjoyment I get out of it. Whether there's been a change, I'm not sure, really. It's a difficult one to answer for sure. Yeah, it's a difficult answer, that one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've just been thinking about it as well. And there's been some lovely pictures of big salmon and stuff doing the round, which I've enjoyed seeing. And I described social media because that's how we view fishing from the inside and possibly from the outside as well. And I described this when I started this podcast a number of years ago now, that social media at the time felt like the Wild West, and perhaps it has calmed down a little bit. So I guess you can only do so much with it, and perhaps that might be why it's spreading out just that little bit wider, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, social media is one of them, isn't it? I mean, social media can be what you want it to be, especially in the fishing world. There are people out there, competition anglers, or guides who need to show certain things in order to get clients or in order to, please sponsors and stuff like that. That's absolutely fine. It's not for me. I'm not a big user of social media. I don't post on it very often. I think it's a good thing in terms of bringing the community together and showing people what's available, and it's a good learning resource as well, in terms of searching for flies and things like that. And I was looking for a certain reel last year, which I found through social media. The one I wanted a custom built reel, so I wouldn't have found that had it not been for social media. So in terms of business use and promotion, it's absolutely brilliant. But it you can make it what you want it to be. I'm an observer of social media as opposed to a serial poster, if you like.
Nice. Like your style as always, mate. Let's move on a little bit. And you've touched on the Spey very briefly, but I wanted to get a sense, and we've talked also about rising trout and your love for targeting those as well. But do you have a favourite? Would it be trout or would it be salmon, or are you just like doing whatever you're doing?
Tricky one. I'd probably say my favourite fish is the grayling, actually. I'm a big fan of grayling, probably because of where I live, the Dee's got a huge population of grayling and some good ones with it. So that's probably kind of biased me a little bit. Yeah, I'd say probably if I had to pick one fish to fish for going forward, it would be the grayling. But I do enjoy, I like catching salmon and sea trout. I like spey casting, and that's a huge part of it again for me. So, I was talking a little bit before about, not hugely enjoying nymph fishing, but one thing I'm looking to get into next year a little bit more is trout spey. And effectively fishing nymphs and wet flies and small streamers on a really, really light one weight double-handed rod, because I've got the enjoyment then of the casting, which I do, is a large part of it for me, because I do other sorts of angling. I do coarse fishing as well, and I enjoy it a lot, but it doesn't have that aspect of the casting so much for me, which is what kind of initially drew me to fly fishing. So I'm trying to think now. I've got, I'm at that stage of life where I've got a little bit less time to get out on the water, trying to maximise the enjoyment I have when I'm out there. So next year I've made a bit of a plan as to I'm going to kind of dedicate it to doing a bit of trout spey, and trying different things that way. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
We've touched on the casting and you mentioned it just there. What made you want to develop your fishing a little bit further and take casting exams?
So I kind of, when I was, I just finished my GCSEs, 16, I had a place down at Sparsholt College, which is down Winchester way. And that was to go into fisheries management. Unfortunately, at the time, I was going through some problems with my mental health, which I think we're going to touch on a little bit later. But I wasn't in the right state of mind really to be living away from home at that time. So that kind of had to get knocked on the head. So I went back and did a year of A-level and realised it really wasn't for me. So I got myself a job at Orvis in Tarporley. And from there, I decided that the kind of fishing was the way I wanted to, that was the kind of world I wanted to be in at the time. If I could make a career out of it, that would be brilliant. So the kind of natural progression for me was to kind of look to do my exams. I have to say, when I was very fortunate when I was talking about learning from guides before. I was very fortunate that someone took me under their wing when I was about 15, 16, and taught me an awful lot in terms of casting, and I'd help them with lessons and stuff like that. So I learned an awful lot from them at the time, and I kind of was at an ability casting wise that I knew I didn't have that much to kind of to improve on. But what I did need to learn was a little bit more about the theory side of it and things like that. So it seemed, being an Orvis, talking to people and things like that, it seemed a kind of natural progression that could take me further down the road.
And you're one of the youngest ever master casting instructors. That must have been a really proud achievement, right?
Yeah, it was. So I joined Gaia at 18, 17 I was when I joined Gaia, and did my single and double-handed kayak when I was 18. And then when I was 19, I took my app guy single-handed exam up in Bellingham on a freezing February Friday morning. And then the year after, the FFI, who were then the FFF, were holding an event in Ireland, and there was a few guys within the organisation who decided they were going to go for it. So I thought, well, yeah, I'll give it a go as well. So yeah, we went over on the ferry, me and Phil Ratcliffe and his dad, and I took my master's exam the day before Phil, and yeah, it was a tough exam. It was a bit grueling, to be honest, with 4 hours long, and I probably almost at the time wish I'd kind of waited a little bit longer, because it was almost a bit too much to deal with. But I got through it and passed it, and it was a great weekend away. But I think at the time I was very, very much into understanding mechanics and really analysing every little bit of it. But as I've got a little bit older, I'm probably a little bit wiser. I like to think that anyway. I simplify it a lot more now. I'm not interested so much in the minutiae of stuff. I just, try and keep it as simple as possible. Because basically, at the end of the day, people who are coming for lessons basically just want to improve their casting. They don't really care why it happens and the consequence of. They just want to be able to improve on what they've been able to do, so they can fish more efficiently, effectively. So yeah, I try to keep it a lot more simple now than I used to, and I think that's probably helped from getting with getting a little bit older, and probably having a better understanding actually through experience. The better you understand something, the easier you can make it. So yeah.
And do you see then, because you make some really interesting points there, and I was going to ask you about the role of the instructor, and perhaps has that changed a little bit? Because you can go onto YouTube, and you said you were looking at YouTube at lots of stuff before you embarked on your journey as a instructor and, of course, a angler as well. But do you think that has changed? Because I sometimes wonder, initially when you've passed an exam, people teach as if they're actually teaching someone who's taking the exam, which isn't really what is actually needed. And we know probably what they want out of the lesson because we've asked them, but also they want to get their fly from A to B as efficiently as possible. And it's our role to do that without making it so jargon heavy. Do you think that has changed a bit from when you started, though?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally and collectively, it has changed a little bit. I think there's no substitution for teaching. That's where you learn. I mean, someone said, I can't remember who said it to me, but really, once you've passed your exams, that's when the kind of learning really begins, and that's when you pick up. That's where you really pick up skills and hone your skills in order to quickly work out what's wrong with someone's technique and how to put it right in the simplest form. And that's what anyone coming for a lesson, that's all they really want. I don't like, you might only have an hour with someone, so you're not blessed with time all the time. So you've got to find the fault quickly and fix it quickly, but in a simple way. As for, has the role changed? It probably has a little bit. I still think more people should go for lessons. I'm not saying, they should be having a lesson every 2 weeks or something like that. But I mean, once a year for a little tune-up is beneficial for everyone, really. Even myself, I get other people to look at me, and vice versa. Other people ask me to see what they're doing, and other instructors. I mean, and we kind of, it's a learning curve for everyone, and inevitably stuff will go wrong. Techniques will, get a bit lazy and stuff like that. So it's always good to have someone watch over you. But yeah, YouTube is a good option. I think it's certainly something that could be utilised. Something I've thought about in the past. I learnt to tie flies purely on YouTube, so I've never had a fly tying lesson. So everything I've ever learnt has been through books and from YouTube. So it does work, but at the same time, you can probably speed up your understanding and ability to perform something with someone by your side.
You make some great points there, and putting this in perspective for listeners, because they don't know you like I do, but John is, and I've been around casting, I know good casters, and John is probably one of the most talented casters I know, along with his fishing skills, of course. And my wife Emma says that she's channeling John when she's casting really, really well, because he makes it look so smooth and easy. Yet somebody like John still goes to see somebody, and there is this thing about, if we're playing golf, we go to the driving range, and I talk about this a lot, but it seems as though we don't do quite so much of that with fly casting, do we?
We don't. I mean, I've lost count of the amount of hours I've spent on the field just throwing a line about with other instructors and on my own. I used to do it every single day. I used to be out on the field practicing. So yeah, there is no substitute really for practicing it. If you want to enjoy your fishing as much as possible, I would say you might benefit from having a quick tune-up with an instructor just at the start of the season. They just, you might learn a few things that you hadn't known before. You might pick up some, more efficient ways of doing something, and yeah, it's just definitely worth having someone look over you once a year.
Let's move on to guiding as well, because I know you've done a little bit of guiding as well, and I think you've done a season overseas amongst other things. Has that been fun?
Yeah, probably guiding is a close second to teaching, but it is a very close second. I started guiding. I got my first guiding job, if you like, in Slovenia, where I spent a few seasons with Slovenia fly fishing. Kevin and Rosie, they have a lodge out there, so I went out there initially on a week's holiday, fishing on the Socha and the Idritsa and rivers like that, and I was invited back to be a guide for them the year after. So I took that up, and I absolutely loved it. The guests stayed in the house, so you're constantly with the guests. There were long days. You're up and out at 8, and then you might be back at 9 at night, and then it's repeat, and it's every day through the season. It's probably the tiredest I've been in terms of work, but it was a really, really enjoyable experience for me. And that's, of course, where I kind of started guiding with you, Pete. I think there was a client I guided out there who recommended me to you, so that's how we met.
Yeah, I think that year that you were down with us was one of my favourite, and I think we had Dunk working with us as well.
Yeah.
And I know you stayed with us for a while before you got a place sorted, and Claire came down, and the whole thing of driving to work in our cars, having a cup of coffee at the Fox and Hounds, sorting out the beats, talking to people, that whole thing was just, for me, about as good as it gets. And having people that you're working with that are just so supremely talented, and I sense enjoying it as much as you're doing it as well. For me, that was a really special time. So I'd like to thank you for that. And I kind of remember as well that we'd get back from work and we'd either go fishing or go casting, or it was pretty full on, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think for those who never have been a guide, it's a bit of a way of life, really. It's the kind of it's a difficult life. You kind of you're never going to make mega money doing it, and the season's fairly short. So you kind of you make a few sacrifices, but you do it for the love of being out on the water and teaching people and helping people. And to be honest with you, if it's something that I could make work now, I probably would go back to it. But family commitments and things like that, it's a tricky game.
Yeah, that was, well, it was fun and I enjoyed every second of it. Now, you've touched on this a little bit, but I would like to ask you about, a lot has been said about fly fishing and being good for mental health, but what do you feel about it and does it help you?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a backstory to this, really. I mentioned it earlier. When I was 15, I was diagnosed with depression, and it's something that I still struggle with today. I was pretty ill when I was 15. Ended up in hospital for a number of months due to it. But the one thing that kind of kept me going through all that was fishing. I just got into it. And I remember when I was in hospital, my godfather, who I used to go up to the Spey with, had dropped off literally 150 magazines, like fly fishing, fly tying, trout and salmon, trout fishermen. And that kept me kind of, whilst I was trying to get better, that kind of gave me something to look forward to, when I was better. And I'd say fishing probably did save my life in a way. I was in a dark place, and it's that kind of that pull to be out and free. I just can't really explain how important it's been for me and the effect it's had on my life. And yeah, I think I think it's well known, I think, for being kind of cathartic for people. There are numerous charities out there for mental health and fishing, but also for things like cancer and stuff like that. So, I think it's a brilliant pastime just to kind of zone out, get away from the world, and kind of just reset the batteries.
And for you, was that healing process, would it have been getting ready to go fishing? Would it be turning up at the river? Would it be that first cast? Would it be a fish? Was it all of those things? Getting out the car, was that where you felt the energy starting to come back and starting to feel better? Or and at the end of the day, would you feel filled up again and ready to tackle life again a bit more head on?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably it's the kind of it started probably with the imagination of what could happen, and I'm very much like that today. I'm a very visual person, so I kind of almost daydream about what the river's going to be like, what flies are going to be hatching, what am I going to tie on to start with, what rod am I going to use, how am I going to fish, and all that kind of that build up for 3-4 days before you go, and constantly thinking about it. And I've always been like that, probably overthinking it really, but that's a big part of it for me. That kind of enjoyment, that pre-visualization of what might be. Of course, it never happens how you kind of think it might happen in your head, but that's part of the fun as well. That's kind of working out the kind of the situation in which you're faced, really. But yeah, the drive, and I'm not big on. I'm not a huge fan of fishing on my own. I like fishing with other people. I like that camaraderie. I like chatting fishing. I like that kind of that ability to socialize and talk about things that we love. So, when I was younger, my dad used to take me to the still waters. He didn't fish himself, but he'd always stay with me. And he kind of took a bit of an interest in it, did a bit of sea fishing and things like that. But he would never fly fish. But just being with him and spending time together, and then as I learned to drive and things like that, and I could go with other people and take myself, it's something that to this day I've always enjoyed more than being on my own. I much prefer going fishing with other people. It's just a bit of an adventure, really, and it's just that's something I really enjoy.
And for you, was the fishing, if you were not feeling so great, is it easy to recognize that, and so you could use fishing to help you and take you away from that moment to help heal or prevent something happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's a zone out, really. I think it's I've always said to Claire, there's kind of two things in the world that I completely forget about everything else. One of them's fishing, and one of them's when I'm watching the football. And with fishing, I'm there. I'm not thinking about what's going on in life. I'm thinking about, have I got the right fly on? Am I fishing the fly correctly? And then you'd be distracted by maybe like a kingfisher going past or something like that. And you're just there in the present moment. That's the one thing that fishing really does for me, is it brings me into the present moment. I'm not in the past or the future, which with depression, anxiety, that's where you are most of the time. You're either in your past or you're in your future, in your thinking mind. So to be able to come out of that is that's one of the big benefits I find with fishing, to just be present for just a few hours in the day, and just kind of get you back on that kind of even keel.
And is that why you said, when I was asking you about how do you prefer to fish, is it, so you don't really mind or care because being there is doing so much more for you than actually the fishing itself in some respects?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably is. It's very difficult for me to describe the kind of relationship I have with fishing. It's it's part of me in a way. It's kind of something that keeps me going. So when I'm I don't really mind how I'm fishing. I'm quite happy to just take my time, chill out, work things out, and see what I can catch.
What advice would you give to people? Because there'll be people listening who have maybe suffering anxiety. They may not realize they're suffering anxiety, but what advice would you give them regarding using fishing, but also on a broader sphere as well?
I think the most important thing is to remember, there is help out there. You might feel like you're on your own, and I'm a big. I've probably been the worst kind of person at kind of realizing that up until recently. I've never really taken to talking to people about my issues and stuff. I've always kind of bottled it in. I'll talk to my parents and my wife, but I've never, sought professional help really since being in the the kind of young adult system. So I see a psychologist once a week now, and I've been working with her now for 2 years, and that's been a massive help. So first thing I would say is, if you can get some, reach out, try and get some help. There is help out there for you. There's plenty of charities as well that you can talk to, like Mind. If you do need help, and try and keep your friends and family close and keep them in the loop. What I've found is it's very easy to draw away from everything, and it kind of becomes a vicious circle, and it gets worse and worse and worse. So trying to keep people in the loop, but also from a point of view is it's also important for you to, not just as yourself, but as to reach out to your friends and to your family and see how they're doing as well. It's not, it's a sad fact, but suicide's the biggest killer of men under the age of 35, and I think probably men don't talk enough about their problems, but try and get us, reach out and get the help that you need, because it is out there.
Beautiful, mate. Thank you so much for speaking so candidly about this and letting us hear your story as well. Which and I'm thrilled that the therapy is working for you right now. And it was lovely to see you a couple of months ago, where we sat and had breakfast in the old place and went down to the river and cast some rods, and it was like the old times. And people, I often say on here as well, and I've lost friends in the last few years that have been close to me due to mental health, and just call up friends. And if you're in my phone book, I'll phone you up, and I know I've done the same with you, John, haven't I? And we stayed in touch. And I always try and phone people and check in on them, see how they're doing, because you may not know what sort of shit they might be going through. And that phone call saying, how you doing, or do you fancy coming fishing, can be really important for them. And as John has so eloquently and so beautifully said, that getting to that river can really help be in the present. So thanks, John, so much for that. We're going to move on a little bit. And you talked about the reel that you were searching down. It would listeners, sorry, would kill me if I didn't ask you what reel you were trying to hunt down.
Yeah, so it was. I got a trout spay rod from Bob Miser, an 11-foot 4-weight, which I kind of bought with the intention of using as a kind of daytime sea trout rod. Really, I like night fishing, but I'd kind of rather fish in the day these days. So yeah, I wanted a reel that would kind of go with that. So it was a Spaco reel, guy in America. So I kind of looked at his stuff on Instagram, and kind of wanted a kind of red finish to it to match the kind of whippings that were on the Miser rod. So yeah, that's what it was.
Like your style, like that very much. And I seem to remember you were playing with the trout spay when you were down here, weren't you? I remember.
Yeah. It's something I've been playing around with for a few years. I probably enjoy spay casting more than anything else. Unfortunately, the salmon fishing where I am is not great. I mean, it's not what it was anywhere, unfortunately. So I want to keep that kind of. I want to still be able to fish the kind of spay style. So kind of getting into the trout spay. I think, I believe it'll be quite effective on the D. Fishing indicators and nymphs underneath, and swinging wet flies and small streamers. I think it was going to allow me to cover a lot of water, and really enjoy the time that I have on the water, fishing in a bit of a different way.
Just want to get geeky for a second. So you're thinking about streamers and nymphs, and it's a one weight. Does that mean that you'll use a Skagit line with it, or will it be a Scandi line, or what have you got in mind for that?
Yeah, so I'm on the I've got the 1 weight and the 4 weight. The 4 weight is my kind of, like I said, is my daytime sea trout rod, and my kind of, I hope, bigger fly rod, if you like. So I tend to fish. I'll fish streamers, bigger streamers on that. So on the D, hook size is limited to where I fish is limited to a size 8 if you're fishing for brown trout on grayling. So I started tying tubes with smaller hooks so I can fish a slightly bigger fly and get away with a shorter hook. But on the 1 weight, it's I don't use. Sorry. Onto the Skagit thing. I use a Skagit on the 4 weight, and that's my kind of primary line. On the 1 weight, I use an integrated line. It's a rear one. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's just called the Trout Spey. But that's a completely integrated line. You can fish it like a Scandi. It's a bit more delicate than the Skagit, so I'm not fishing big flies with that. I'm fishing like your usual nymph patterns, 12s up to, down to 20s, wet flies, kind of 14s, 16s, streamers, which are like size 10s on a jig hook, like little woolly buggers, they're like mini lures, really, like what you'd use on a still water. So I'm trying to fish for the kind of fish the natural stuff, really, in the small stuff that the grayling and the trout are taking with the 1 weight. Yeah, this kind of, I suppose I'm using it to take over from that kind of nymphing setup that I would have used, but have kind of fallen out of love with. So it's kind of a bit of a replacement for that, really.
And your rod choices are interesting, mentioning the Miser. And I know we had a conversation on the phone a little while back when you were thinking of getting them. And I think I was saying that I was using a CND and some other. Do you think there is an interest for you looking at these more boutique fringe brands rather than always the mainstream? The mainstream rods are fabulous, don't get me wrong. But sometimes I think possibly where we've been so deeply in it that you kind of want to look in other areas for tackle. Is that what you found yourself?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the fringe brands are making stuff that's so good these days. Some of it is cheaper than the mainstream. Some of it's more expensive than the mainstream. It's more of a kind of, it's a bit artisan. It's a bit kind of, it's just a bit different. It's something that you can kind of appreciate the kind of the workmanship involved. And if you want something a bit different and custom, you've got that option to put it in. Whereas, if you're buying rods off the rack, you haven't. But, I still use rods off the rack. I'm not purely into, not all my rods are custom built for me. I do use rods off the rack as well. So they're a nice thing to have. I think it's just a nice thing to have, really. Just something a little bit different. You look at the companies like OPST, the Olympic Peninsula Skagit techniques. They've kind of revolutionized a little bit the trout spey world, and Ed Ward's been, obviously he's kind of one of the godfathers of Skagit fishing. Kind of he's developed some rods now for them, and their lines have always been really good. So yeah, there are plenty of options out there these days with tackle. But yeah, like you said, it's the mainstream. There isn't I think back in the day, there were bad rods, there were bad fly lines. Even going back 15, 20 years, there were rods and lines that weren't really great. But I think these days, you can go into any tackle shop, or you can find someone building rods online, and you pretty much know these days that the quality is going to be there. So yeah, it's more of a personal choice getting the custom stuff. It's just a want more than a need.
Excellent. Well, whilst we're on tackle, before we move on, what is your Hall of Fame rod? And I'll give you a double hander and I'll give you a single hander.
Single hander would be the original Helios, Orvis Helios, purely because that's what I took all my single-handed exams with. I fished with a few different models of them as well, 4 weights, and I had a 6 weight for the exams. So yeah, I fished with them quite a lot. In terms of double handers, it will be the Miser, the 13-foot 8 weight Miser Highlander Classic, which I use the majority of the time when I'm salmon fishing.
Nice. If you could go anywhere, and you've worked in Slovenia, you've travelled, I know you've caught bones and all sorts of stuff, but if you could go anywhere in the world, where would your dream destination be?
Well, I'm a bit of a fantasizer, really, so I think of these dream destinations quite a lot, and I've been lucky enough to go to a number of places and fish. I've fished in Bosnia and Slovenia and Mexico and places like that, and Norway. I've been lucky to do that. But I think if I had to choose one trip and one river, it'd be steelhead fishing on the Skeena. Would be it's a close one between sea trout in Argentina, but I think for me it'd probably be steelhead on the Skeena. Would be the dream.
Nice choice. Nice choice. Now, I just wanted to ask you another question. It was regarding fly fishing as a whole. And we often hear, and I've been bringing it up a little bit of late, about, we've got to grow fly fishing, we've got to keep bringing people in. But do you think that it's just a tiny group of us who are fanatical about it, and then there's others who populate our pastime, thankfully, that do it along with lots of other things? So is there a need for us to actually grow? Are we coming to terms that we are just a small pastime?
I think we are a small pastime. I think even if you take fishing as a general, we're a small part of it. Do we need to grow? It's a tricky one. I know we talk all the youngsters involved and stuff like that, but looking at it from someone my age, and I'm going to relate this back to golf. When I was younger, I played a lot of golf. I was a junior member, and I played all the way up till I was a Colts member at 17. And then I gave it up. Life got in the way. I had other things to do. Obviously, I was fishing a lot as well, so that kind of that was a higher priority for me. But other things happen. You get married and houses and jobs and things like that. But I've come back to golf recently. With having a little bit more, now I'm a bit more settled down with a house and having being married and things like that. So I think people say look at the average of people that the British Fly Fair as an example, and it is a bit older. But I think I don't think it's because fly fishing is difficult to get into. I don't think it's because it's seen as a snobby thing. I think it's because the younger generation have other priorities, and then they also don't have the disposable income as much, especially with kids and things like that. So I think they come to it a bit later on in life. Now there will be the people who start it at 5 years old and will never stop and go all the way through. There will be people who start it young, give it up, and then come back to it, and then there will be those people that take it up later on in life. I think it'll always be there. Whether it needs to grow or not, I'm not sure. I don't think there's much. I sound a bit pessimistic here, but I don't think there's much you can do to get more people into it, really. I think people will come to it in their own time. I think it is it's a niche. We've got to admit it's a niche activity that we do. It won't appeal to everyone. It is fairly expensive. I know you can get cheap stuff, cheaper rods these days, which are good quality, and same with lines. And you can get day tickets and things like that. So you don't have to be members of places. But it is there is still that financial aspect to it. But I actually think for the younger generation, I think it's time. I think that is the biggest problem for people. I'm going to again use golf as an example. If you look at the average age in members clubs, it is a bit older. It's probably 40, 50 years old. And a lot of clubs are after younger players. Not juniors so much, but the kind of 20 to 35-year-olds. My club does a deal for me because of my age, because it wants a younger kind of a younger member. But I think even with doing the improving the financial aspect of it, I just don't think people who are between 20 and 40 have as much time as what they would like to do these activities. Other things come first, and I think that's probably the kind of the simple answer really is I just think time is the thing.
Some great points. So, if you're going to the river, does that mean that you're getting in the mindset, you're starting to get that excitement, you've loaded up the car, you're ready to go? Does that mean that you will drive to the river in silence? But if not, if you have a song that you may listen to, if there was a song that you could put on to put you in the mood to drive to the river for our Fly Culture playlist thing on Spotify, is there something that you would choose for us?
Probably first and foremost, I'd probably put a podcast on. But if I was going to listen to music, I know they're kind of a bit mainstream and in the news at the minute, but I'm a big fan of Oasis. And my favourite song would be Little by Little. So I would say, yeah, A Little by Little by Oasis.
Good choice. We'll pop that on, or we may pop it on. I haven't updated it for ages, so apologies, but there's still loads of songs on there, and I will. It's almost just to get a sense of you and your musical taste more than anything else. But we've spoken over an hour. I've loved every second of it. If people want to connect with you, how do they find you?
Instagram, John Boon Fly Fishing. Like I say, I'm not. I do still have a website, but I'm not. Unfortunately, I haven't quite got as much time as I used to have to teach and things like that. I will get back into it, more religiously as time allows. But you can send me messages on Instagram, John Boon Fly Fishing, and there's probably some old photographs on there. Hasn't been updated in a while, but if you send me a message on there, I will get back to you.
Fantastic, matey. Well, always a pleasure to speak with you, as always. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. It has been a fabulous episode and been wonderful to catch up with John and to hear his story. And I hope we'll all take something from that as well. So thank you so much for listening. And as ever, there'll be plenty more coming very, very soon.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.